So when we think of retirement, unless you have one of those jobs that's known to have an old school pension plan, aka a defined benefits plan, most of us, at least if you've been tapped into our content, know that for the most part, you're on your own. Meaning that if you plan to retire one day, that's all on you, my friend. Now, even though this is the reality for most of us, there are still tons of jobs out there that offer some sort of corporate retirement plan that you can sign up for. What's interesting though is that corporate retirement plans are another one of those money things that no one really talks about. Like if we take it back to the beginning for a second, the very first time that you probably heard someone mention a corporate retirement plan was probably during your benefits enrollment period at work. HR probably reached out to you or sent you some sort of email reminder telling you that you had until such and such date to enroll into the company's corporate retirement plan if you were interested. In my experience, a lot of people either don't enroll at all because they don't know anything about it, which is unfortunately understandable given that no one teaches you any of these things, or they enroll but they don't really know why or how it all works, so their plan either ends up being pretty bad or it just doesn't reflect what's best for them. Now, some of you may have seen one of my recent updates where I mentioned how I almost lost $10,000 of my own money that was in a corporate retirement plan and how much that sucked. Well, today I'm gonna be giving you guys the full breakdown of how this happened and how all of this stuff works. I'm also gonna break down whether or not you should enroll in a company retirement plan, how they work, and exactly what happened to me from start to finish. So if we start from the beginning, apart from me hearing my parents mention their work pension plans every now and then, or hearing the words defined contribution plan being thrown around, I had no real idea of what pretty much any of this stuff was. If I think back to me getting my first full-time job out of school, I started in the fall, which is exactly when my company did their benefits enrollment period. Now, for anyone who has no idea what that is or what I'm talking about, it's pretty much the time of year when your employer asks you to choose what benefits you want covered based on the plans that they have offered. So for example, it would be how much coverage you want for dental, massages, and more. It really varies from organization to organization. Anyways, I ended up starting at this time, and one of the decisions that I had to make was whether or not I wanted to enroll in my company's defined contribution pension plan, aka their corporate retirement plan. Like a lot of you, I had no idea what I was looking at the time, and on top of that, I tried asking my coworkers what they did or what they thought about the plan, and I typically got one of two responses. I either got someone who knew absolutely nothing about defined contribution pension plans or, hadn't even thought about enrolling in the plan themselves like at all, or I got people who were enrolled themselves but they didn't feel confident or comfortable enough to explain what little they already knew. By the way, if you're wondering why I didn't reach out to HR given the fact that it was them who had reached out to me in the first place, I actually did. The problem though was that they weren't allowed to give me financial advice on whether or not I should do something, which by the way makes total sense. They were simply authorized to tell me more about the program and how it worked from an employee perspective. Anyways, things weren't off to the best start, and what's funny is that a big emotion that no one really talks about is the anxiousness that you feel when it comes to making what are seemingly very big money decisions. Like looking back now, it honestly wasn't even that big of a deal, but like I've said before in some of our other videos, you don't really know until you know. See, I knew that this was important, and I also knew that I didn't have anyone who could guide me through the process. So if I were to make a bad decision or a choice, I knew that it was all gonna be on me. Anyways, before we even get deeper into all of that, here's the gist on what a defined contribution pension plan actually is. Basically, it's a pension plan that's offered as a part of your compensation package, similar to how you would have your salary as well as any other benefits that your employer offers. These plans basically guarantee that a certain amount of money is going to be contributed to your pension every single year, but it's also up to you to decide how it's invested. Now, unlike defined benefits plans, which are what people like my mom, who's a nurse, or even think of teachers, police officers have, the amount that you receive in retirement is not guaranteed. It's not like you contribute to this plan for years and then in retirement you have guaranteed monthly retirement income. It's definitely not like that. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that the value of your defined contribution plan can change depending on the investments that you hold. Now, typically the way it works is that when you have a defined contribution pension plan, it's considered to be you putting away money towards your retirement. So every year that you contribute money to this plan, it actually does reduce your RSP contribution room. Now, how does this all work? Well, when you go to do your taxes each and every single year, when you get your T4 from your employer, they actually have to fill out this box on the actual form that says pension adjustment on it. It's basically a calculation of how much was contributed, and in return, it reduces your RRSP contribution room. So now if we go back to me, I was tasked with the decision of whether or not I wanted to, one, join the plan, which meant that a portion of my paycheck, so a percentage, specifically 2% in my situation, would go towards my pension. And two, how I wanted my money to be invested, so actually choosing from a range of investment options. Now, the first one was actually a simple decision because I knew that the way our plan was set up, my company would actually match my contributions. So even though they only allowed you to contribute a small percentage, I knew that they would match my contributions. So if I contributed $50, aka them taking it out of my biweekly paychecks, I knew that they would also match that and contribute $50 as well. This is essentially just free money for signing up for the plan. And by the way, a good plan will usually allow you to contribute a much higher percentage than this, just saying. Now, where it gets tricky, at least for most people, is when they ask you to choose your investments. So the way that plans are typically structured is that they have what's called a plan administrator. This is an external company that your employer hires to provide and administer anything that has to do with the defined contribution pension plan. So this is going to be companies like, Canada Life, Mercer, Manulife, Sun Life, and the list goes on. Now, these companies usually give you a number of investment options that you can actually choose from. For me, the options were either target date mutual funds, which are funds that are typically based on the year that you think you might retire, and there were also asset allocation mutual funds, which are funds that have a different mix of stocks and bonds that you could also choose from. So now keep in mind that this was like one of my very first investment decisions ever, and after also filling out a risk questionnaire, I went with a portfolio of mutual funds that had 60% stocks and 40% bonds. See, now this is kind of laughable to me at this point because I'm sure many of you guys know, me and Steph exclusively only invest in 100% equity ETFs, so no fixed income or bonds at all. So to think that based on a questionnaire that clearly didn't educate me on why, or even factor in the fact that I was only 23 years old, this is like one of the greatest examples of how the traditional financial industry can work. Either way, this is what I went with, and both me and my employer contributed to this portfolio for about 3 years, with it eventually getting to a value of almost $10,000. Now, this is the point at which me and Steph made the decision to quit our jobs, which is where things actually get even more interesting. So after we quit, I got a letter in the mail a few weeks later that was called a statement of options. It basically broke down what my options were. So depending on how your plan is set up, your money can either be locked in or non-locked in. Based on me reading this form and what little research I could find online, I was under the impression that my money was locked in, which meant that I had to choose where my money went based on the options that were under the locked in category. We'll throw up the document on screen for you guys to see in more detail, by the way. Anyways, based on this, I decided to fill out the document, which meant that I had to check off that I wanted my money to be moved to a self-directed LIRA, one of which I would open myself, and therefore I'd be able to decide how my $10,000 was going to be invested. The last thing I wanted was for my money to stay with the plan administrator, basically barely growing, and instead earning them money in mutual fund fees. But even though that was my plan, it didn't really work out that way. And being the diligent person that I am, I decided to fill out the documents. I checked them once, twice, hell, maybe even 3 times before submitting them, only for me to receive an email after a few weeks telling me that they were wrong and that I needed to fill them out again. And by the way, there was no information on what was wrong with the form. It was basically just, fill out the forms again and get back to us. Well, that's exactly what I did. Only this time I decided to give them a call and make sure that their customer service people were on board with everything that was on the new form. So after speaking to them, they assured me that everything was good to go and that I would hear back from them after another few weeks. So another few weeks go by, I give them a call to make sure that everything is still good. I'm also reassured by pretty much every customer service rep. But like clockwork, the same thing happens again and I've been denied. At this point, I'm busy trying to figure out my new schedule with the new job, and honestly, life just happens sometimes, so I basically just give up on the process. The next thing you know, 3 years go by, and at the back of my mind, I'm still thinking about this $10,000 that's basically been hijacked by this company, or at least that's what it felt like. So I start doing some research and realize that I'm not the only one. There's actually a lot of people out there who have gone through similar things when trying to move their pensions. This is where I decided that enough was enough, and over the course of about 2 months, I dedicated myself to not only learning more about the process, but I also decided that I would call them literally every single day if I had to, which I basically literally had to make sure that they were not playing games. Now, at this point, I basically ended up learning that I didn't even have to transfer my money into a lira. Basically, because of the specific rules of my plan, and given that the amount qualified as a small amount under pension legislation, and based on the jurisdiction, so provincial versus federal, I was able to transfer my money directly into an RRSP. Now, the reason that this was great was because a self-directed RRSP is actually far more flexible and beneficial for me, so I was really happy to figure this out, basically. Anyways, long story short, this process was a complete headache, but at least now I've been able to transfer my money into a self-directed RSP with Wealthsimple, where I've been able to invest the money myself. Also, now that I've gone through it, there's so much more that we can break down and talk about, which I know is really helpful for so many people. With that, we hope that you guys enjoyed hearing my story. I know that the pensions world is actually a really big topic in and of itself, so if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, or if you have a similar story that you want to share, make sure you let us know down in the comments. And with that, we'll catch you next week with another video.